when we come together with people with different gifts, different visions, different ideas, it's very special. As we're standing here talking about this beautiful mandir, I'm here with Troy and with Jolene, who's doing the stained glass. And to just see their minds working and the inspiration coming to life in their heart and mind, to be a witness to that is really something. And each one of us has been a witness to that, to some degree, with the people in our lives, where they become inspired and their creative energy begins to flow. And oftentimes we don't really pay attention. We just kind of feed on the energy, and then we get a little bit more excited, and they get a little bit more excited, and we back and forth and back and forth. But how often do we really just kind of step back and witness the beauty of another human being being inspired? To see as their eyes light up, as their posture straightens, as the visions are coming one after the other in their mind, and they're like, this is so amazing, I'm so grateful to be able to be part of this. And then to just allow our heart to rest in a place of freedom because we have had this blessing, this ability to witness this in another human being, which actually reminds us not only that other people can feel that way, but also that we can too. But how often do we stop and really pay attention to what it is that we're looking at? And so in class this morning, I read to you from the Dhammapada. And so the Dhammapada, the word Dhamma means Dharma. It's another way of saying Dharma. Dhamma. It's the way that the Buddhists pronounce it. The Dhammapada. The chapter is on Dharma. And in this beautiful Buddhist text, it talks about all the virtues of goodness and awareness and awakening, as well as the opposite. What it is to not be awakened, what it is to not be with the Buddha self, with the innermost self, to be ignorant. And my favorite chapter in that book is called Flowers. And there's 2 lines in that chapter that I constantly come back to. I'm paraphrasing slightly. The first line says, there's a gardener who gathers flowers for the sake of gathering only. And the second line, there's a gardener who gathers flowers, who understands the flowers, who is making an offering of that experience. So the one just pulls the flowers out of the ground, takes them and, for selfish enjoyment. And then the other tends to the flowers, tends to them, and witnesses something amazing and inspired. And then it goes on to insinuate that we should ask ourselves, so which gardener are we? Are we the individual who walks through life and just kind of feeds off energy and then blames that feeding for our hard times and as well as our good times? Or are we the person who walks through life and is reflective of what it is that we're witnessing? Sees and appreciates the struggle that others have as well as ourselves. Sees and appreciates the inspiration that others feel as well as ourselves. Which gardener are we? Are we planting the seeds of sorrow, or are we planting seeds of joy and unity? It's a very complicated matter in the mind, but in the heart it's super simple. In the mind we have culture, we have commodity, we have what we've been taught, what we've been trained and entrained to. In the mind, we try to justify. So we say, well, I'm not going to be inspired for that person. They don't deserve my happiness over their inspiration. We make up every kind of excuse in our mind why we should not witness the glory of others. And that's just sad. Because if we're never willing to witness, or if we're rarely willing to witness the glory of others, the inspiration of others, as well as the sorrow and suffering of others, then we are equally unwilling to truly see and witness our own. Instead, what we'll do is run around after things. Well, that'll bring me happiness, that'll get me joy, that'll make me smile. But the moment that we get that, there'll be something else that we have to get. Something else that we run after. Something else that we blame. Something else that we cherish until we blame it. But when we step back and we say to ourselves, I'm seeing all of you come here. And so many people come on a weekly basis. They come on a regular basis, and they come every week. And I really, I sit with that, witnessing people showing up and saying to myself, look at this. It's absolutely beautiful, the intention that they have, the inspiration, the calling of the heart that they're answering. It's beautiful. And it has nothing to do with me, because someone else could be sitting here, and talking. That part of it is just what it is. But for the people who come, whether they come once or 10 times or 100 times, the fact that they come, that their heart is open to listening, that their heart is open to healing. If that's not humbling, I don't know what is. If that's not humbling. And when we become humbled because of what we're witnessing, then we become more open for a few other things too, including acknowledging the sacredness of things. We see other people and sometimes we say, they're struggling, they're stupid, and they should stop. But the more that we come into the witnessing self, the more that we are the gardener who tends the garden, not just exploits the garden, the more that we are that gardener who tends to the garden, who appreciates and has gratitude for the garden, the more we see that others are bearing the seeds of sorrow. They're bearing the weight of that. And it brings a sense of understanding, of compassion. It brings a sense of wanting to support and help, of course. But that also has to be balanced, because we can't fix other people. But what we can do is hold a space for them to go through what they have to go through without being victimized by whatever that is. And that's really important to understand, because oftentimes in spirituality, we get called passive, we get called doormats, all kinds of things, It's like, you're not being nice, therefore you're mean-hearted. It's like, spirituality is not about being nice. Spirituality is not about being a doormat. Spirituality is not about those things. But for some reason, a lot of seekers also misunderstand that, and they think, well, in order for me to be a nice person, a kind person, in order for me to practice compassion, that means I have to be nice to everybody, including this person that I really need to have healthy boundaries with. Therefore, I can't have healthy boundaries, because healthy boundaries aren't nice. And it's like, stop, back way up, and understand that spirituality and nice are not the same thing. Nice is typically, something that we do when we don't want confrontation with people, because we're afraid of confrontation. And spirituality breeds courage and bravery as well as compassion. It doesn't breed fear. So if we're being nice for the sake of avoiding confrontation or because we have some kind of a duty to smile at everybody, then we're misguided. We're misguided if that's coming from a place of fear of retribution. Right? And women particularly, but men more so nowadays too, know this very, very well. Because how many times in your life have you been told, smile, honey? You look so much nicer when you smile. Yeah, right? And so oftentimes women will smile, even when they don't want to. And it's not because they have some kind of spiritual awakening. It's because they don't want one more person telling them to smile because they look prettier when they smile. There's a fear there. There's an obligation to culture. So nice is not spiritual. Smiling is not spiritual. Smiling on the inside might be spiritual. But smiling to appease others is not spiritual. So what is it then that we do when we are practicing our spirituality, when we're witnessing, is that we're coming into an acknowledgement of what is. Just an acknowledgement on the first level. This plant is green. Many different shades of green, but it's green. It's a very simple statement, correct? It's got a little bit of maybe a cream color in there too. Anybody disagree? This plant is green with maybe a little bit of cream colors in there, right? That's what is. The plant is generally healthy. Simple fact. Now I can sit here and I can start to nitpick. And I can start to look through it and say, well, you know, that leaf is this, that leaf is that. Somebody must have put it too close to the window if it's getting dried out. Maybe somebody forgot to water it. I can start making up stories in my mind which overwrite the simple fact or the simpleness of it. I start making stories in my mind, and those stories carry me away from the simplicity and into the complexity. So another example would be you encounter someone who is suffering, and you can tell they're suffering because their behavior. And you could say to yourself, this person is suffering. So I'm just going to send them a prayer. If it's appropriate, offer support. But no, what do? We say, that's one grouchy person, man. That is such a grouchy person. You know, they're always pretty grouchy, aren't they? Every time I see them, they have a scowl on their face. They're not nice to anybody. We get taken away by the story. And the story will never bring us to the truth. The story will only carry us to the ego. And the ego doesn't want you to know the truth because the truth is just so simple. The person is suffering, period. The person is suffering, period. Just like you are suffering, period. When it comes to the simple understanding of it, nothing else needs to be said. Nothing else needs to be said. The person is suffering, period. Just like you're suffering, period. And then once we have that acceptance, we can ask ourselves, what is needed here? What is needed here? Well, there is some violence happening, maybe a healthy boundary, maybe support from somewhere. Well, there's grief. Maybe a referral to a counselor. They're carrying bags and bags of things and dropping things, and maybe a helping hand. What is needed here? So what is actually happening and what is needed? And sometimes multiple things are needed. But if we can see clearly what is happening without applying the story, the great imaginative story, then it will be easier to see what is actually needed. And there's a big difference between what is needed and what is wanted. Well, I want them to be nice to me. Okay? And really, when we say something about another person, like I just want them to be happy, what we're saying is I want them to make me feel happy. I don't want their downer to be my downer. I don't want them to be mad at me. And that's a want. That's a want. If our desire is for others to be happy, then the greatest gift we can give them is to see them as they are. Is to recognize and acknowledge their suffering. Is to recognize and acknowledge their capacity to heal. Is to recognize and acknowledge their confusion. Is to recognize and acknowledge their violence. Is to recognize and acknowledge their love. Is to recognize and acknowledge whatever it is that's happening, but rather than condemning, taking right action. Rather than judging them to be forever evil, taking right action, what is needed. Does that make sense? We have a rehabilitative penal system in this country, supposedly. We don't really, but we're supposed to. Rehabilitative. What is it to be rehabilitative? To be rehabilitative is to allow the space to learn and grow beyond the confines of current behavior. That's to be rehabilitative. To learn and grow beyond the confines of current behavior. But we penalize instead. And we call it rehabilitation. We say, if I punish you enough, maybe you'll grow. But punishing doesn't lead to growth. Punishing doesn't lead to growth. So we also need to understand the difference between punishing and appropriate boundaries. Because that's another thing that we confuse. We say, well, if I put in appropriate boundaries, I feel like I'm punishing them. No. Actually, you're cutting off the source of or the opportunity to commit behaviors that will potentially eventually be punished by a penalty-oriented society. So you put the safe boundary in place as a gift, as an offering, as the right thing to do, the kind thing to do, not the nice thing to do. The kind thing to do is to say, I won't take part in promoting your suffering. I won't feed your suffering. Nope, won't do that. But as we talked about last week, there's some skills that have to be in place in order to know how to do this, right? So it's a great conversation. It's a wonderful thing to talk about, but what are the skills that we need in order to cultivate the ability to express our spirituality in a way that is healthy and honest and not harming and not misunderstood by our own self? What skills do we need? And that's where your yoga practice can come in very handy, your meditation practice. The more time you spend with yourself, cultivating some kind of a practice, the more you come to understand yourself. The more you understand what your misunderstandings are about yourself and what the reality of your condition is. What are my triggers? What are my joys? What are my gratitudes? When do I become weak? When am I strong? We start to understand these things as we're taking warrior one posture or sitting in a forward fold, struggling. We get to see it close up with nothing to obscure it except our imaginative ego saying, I don't like this posture. It's the posture's fault, It's always the posture's fault. Instead of saying, there goes my mind again, making up stories. And eventually we get to that place where we recognize the difference between the actual experience and the story that we associate with it. And then we learn how to breathe. We learn how to breathe through it. We learn how to sit with the discomfort. We learn how to sit with the discomfort, how to breathe through it, how to watch it, how to witness it, how to learn about what it really is. And then, maybe what is needed. In the yoga class, maybe it's a prop. In life, maybe it's a support. But we learn that. And in that process of learning, we become the gardener that tends to the garden. The gardener that doesn't just collect flowers for the sake of collecting flowers. We don't exploit any longer. Instead, we nourish. If only it was super simple and easy. It is super simple, but it's not easy. I don't know. You know how they say if you tell a little white lie, you have to remember all the details of that little lie, and then eventually you have to tell some more lies to substantiate the first lie, and eventually you've got this whole lie, right? What's easier, one truth or 10,000 lies? What's easier, one simple detail or 10,000 imaginative stories that could go on and on and on forever that have very, very little truth to them? Which one would you prefer to live by, the simple or the complicated? Simple. Simple is what brings rest to the heart. Simple is what brings rest to the nervous system. Simple is what brings eventually, rest to the mind, eventually. Simple. Try it in your food, right? Try it in your food. One day, make a really complicated meal. Really, really complicated. Lots of different things in there, even things that don't go together very well, because typically that's what we do. We throw a lot of stuff together in life that don't really go together very well, and then we wonder why it doesn't taste very good, right? So try that. Put macaroni and cheese with beans, with something else. Just put a whole conglomeration together. Make it complicated and see how your body reacts to that. Your digestive system, your nervous system. See how your mind and emotions react to that when you go to eat it. And then the next day, or maybe 2 days later, give yourself some time to work that through. Make a simple meal. Very simple, very specific. Something highly nourishing, but not complicated. And see how your body reacts to that, and how your mind reacts to that. And what you'll see there is a direct reflection of life. That the more complicated and mishmashed we make things, the more insult to our body, to our nervous system, to our mind, the more sick we feel, the more chaotic we feel. But when we live life simply, digestion is stronger, mentality is stronger, emotional state is more balanced, the nervous system isn't up and down so much. Our energy is conserved and we feel nourished. Which one do you want to be? The cook who throws everything in the pot for the sake of throwing everything in the pot? Or the cook who makes something very simple, highly nourishing, and therefore divine to the body, mind, and soul? So we started off talking about the Dhammapada and talking about this just beautiful statement about the gardener from the chapter Flowers. And it says also in that chapter that a lotus will grow from a pile of refuse on the side of the road, a pile of garbage, and a lotus will grow there. And the lotus will be untouched. And I'm paraphrasing now and adding to it, but the lotus will be untouched by the smell of the garbage, by the dirt of the garbage. Just like the lotus that grows from the bottom of the swamp. At the time that it blooms at the top of the water, it's untainted by its surroundings. It doesn't smell like the swamp. It's not dirty and mucky like the swamp. And actually, the water of the swamp just rolls right off of it. Like if water does get on the leaf, it pearls up and it rolls right off. The lotus is unaffected by its surroundings. It simply shines with its innate beauty, its innate purity for all to witness, whether they know they're witnessing it or not. And in yoga, the lotus is symbolic for the human, because we started off as a little seed, and that seed was planted in this world. And this world certainly can be mucky and muddy, complicated like a swamp. And we grow through this world, but not as part of this material world. We grow while we're walking through the world, yes. But when the time comes for us to blossom, what is blossomed is not a reflection of the world we live in. It's not a reflection of the violence of the world. It's not a reflection of the muck and the mud. It's a reflection of the divinity that exists within you. You, in and of your soul, is untainted by the world around you. It's untainted by the world that human beings have created. And the soul is also untainted by the natural world. The mind is tainted, for sure. The body is tainted, for sure. But the soul is not. The soul is untainted by the human world and by the natural world. Because the soul is eternal. Eternal, untouchable, untaintable. And the journey of the lotus flower through the swamp is symbolic of that. And if we can see that and accept it as just a simple detail that has truth to it, then it supports us in bringing our life to a less complicated space. It supports us in releasing harmful behaviors and getting so caught up in things that don't last. The soul lasts forever. This body doesn't. It says right there, is in one of the chapters that I read, the body is discarded and ends up like, a log on the ground. It's like there's nothing there. You're not there anymore. So don't invest so much into what the ego compels you to invest in by way of excess. Stay with the middle road. The middle road is the simple road. All the way over here and all the way over here, those are the excesses. The absolute do's and the absolute don'ts. In many instances, those are the excesses that lead us away from the experience of our innermost self and deep into confusion about who we are, what our purpose here is. And then when we abide with the excesses, when we're in that place of extremes, we're the gardener that collects for the sake of collecting. We're not the gardener that knows how to tend and nourish and truly grow a garden. Thoughts or questions so far?
I have a lot.
Starts with one.
When I go home, I always, after you listen to it again with all of my notes. Go to the next person and let me think about this.
Very good.
I have a lot going on up there.
Questions or comments, reflections from anybody? Angelique?
It's kind of more related to what you're reading in the other, was that from that same book about the fool?
The what?
The fool?
Yes.
That's all
the Dhammapada.
The Dhammapada.
Yep, Dhamma, Pada. And so there is, there's a variety of chapters. My favorites that I personally like, which are the ones that I was reading to you, were Flowers, The Fool, The Mind, The Wise Man. But they're all amazing, every one of them. Just that in my own life, I have found so much wisdom in those chapters, particularly. The Dhammapada, or the Dharma, the book on Dharma. Mm-hmm.
Is P-O-T-T-A?
Huh?
Is it P-O-T-T-A?
P-A-D-A.
You know, the accent.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions or reflections so far? No? Okay. Are we ready? Okay.
Yes. You talked about, as you were talking, I could see myself in so many different aspects of my life, whether it be with my husband or with my children, even with work. I tend to punish the people around me when I feel that they aren't doing the things that I think that they should be doing to make me feel better. And that's not their responsibility, it's mine.
Yeah.
So that was just one thought, that even with work, I see myself doing the same thing there. It's something that I need to work on personally.
And that's a brave and beautiful understanding. It's a brave and beautiful understanding. Because we don't oftentimes like to acknowledge that we think we're a punisher.
Yes.
You know, and there are many ways to punish people. You know, I mean, there's obvious ways, which invokes, physical violence. But there's also mental, emotional ways to punish people, like the way you look at them, right? The intention that you send to them.
The mom look.
The mom look, totally, the mom voice too. Which I've given to my children on occasion. But yeah, so there's lots of different ways to punish people. Aversion is another form of punishment, and that's such a psychological punishment, is to avoid people. And it's not to say that if someone has an unhealthy influence on you in any way, shape, or form, should you actively seek them out? No. You run into them in the market, should you give them a hug? No. But you don't run away either. You acknowledge in the moment. Whatever it is that you do it with full awareness. That's the other chapter that we read this morning, was awareness. Whatever you do it with full awareness. You say silently to yourself, I have had a negative experience with that person in the past. I don't wish to cause them harm, but I also do not wish to cultivate a relationship with them. So you don't go hide away. You just openly walk. You go about your business. If you need help, then you ask for help. If you need support, then you ask for support. If you're afraid, then, because maybe there's a reason to be afraid, then you seek out someone to walk alongside you. Does that make sense? Yeah. Everything we do with awareness of what and why we're doing it. And then we don't get lost in the stories. And by stories, I mean the parts of it that are not based in in accurate details, which is most oftentimes a lot of it. Yes, Carissa.
Just a reflection, the simple truth of recognizing that others behave or think the way they do because they're suffering, in my own experience, has been like the biggest thing for me to, it's changed the way I've thought in many different ways, the way my relationships with people are in a lot of different ways, and I constantly reassure myself that, because my family tends to, push their suffering onto others, and, I just always remember to myself that, they're not, selfish, hateful, that, all those words the ego can come up with, but they're suffering, period. And, it was just really just a life changer, stopping the ego from creating all these stories and just looking at the person saying, you are suffering, and, period.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a game changer.
But there is that egotistical part of us that wants to be the punisher, wants to be the judge and the jury and the executioner too. And it does take bravery in order to acknowledge that to ourselves and then to begin to change that. It's not up to us, really, to determine whether another person's life has been horrible enough to justify their poor behavior. It's not up to us. What's up to us is to study our own poor behavior and determine how we can change it. Yes?
So another reflection that I have been having recently and throughout the yoga, something that I noticed and now it's kind of reaffirmed here is that more so than wanting to punish other people, I punish myself. And I create stories about myself. And I punish myself for these stories, and I struggle to go through life and accept the challenges that I face and accept things that maybe I could have done better, and instead I constantly punish myself.
Yeah. And that's also another very brave statement to make, very brave and beautiful acknowledgement, is to say, sometimes I want to be the punisher of others, and often I am the punisher of my own self. Once you come into this simpler perspective on life, and we start looking for nourishment rather than the mishmash of quantity, then one of the things that is a side effect or a consequence of that is that we do have a heightened awareness that happens. And the heightened awareness is initially going to be grasped on by the ego and tried to shred it. Because the ego understands that in a simple life there is no place for it. At least not when it's unhealthy. When it's healthy, sure, of course. But when it's unhealthy, when it's narcissistic and all these other things, which we all are to some degree, that in a simple life there's no space for that. There's no place where that can run rampant. And so we just naturally, a little bit at a time, begin to change the perception that we have of others, but also of ourselves. There's an awareness that is a consequence of living a simple life that leads us to a greater kindness to ourselves. But sometimes we really do need to kind of take the bull by the horns. And when we're in the self-punishment mode, which we've all been there before, every single one of us, some to a greater extent than others, to grab that bull by the horns is to remind yourself constantly that you are, as Marianne Williamson said in the reading this morning, that you are a child of God, who are you to play it small? Who are you to deny your own divinity? As a matter of fact, your dharma is to embrace that divinity. Your dharma is to be the utmost version of a human being walking through this world, is to be kind and gentle, but also strong and powerful, to be compassionate and patient, but to also be brave and straightforward, to, as best we can, allow our actions to come from a place of honesty in our heart, rather than grasping in our mind. Self-punishment comes from a place of feeling of a few things. Self-punishment comes from learning that you are not valuable, wherever that lesson comes from in life. And sometimes it's the billboard, the magazine, the television, sometimes it's family and friends, sometimes it's relationships that we find ourselves in along the way. But somewhere we learned that we lack value. So we need to retrain ourselves so that we come back to our own inherent value. The second thing is that we're told we're always wrong. You're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. And so we adopt that as our story. That becomes our storyline. Like, well, so-and-so told me I'm wrong, so therefore I must always be wrong. But that's, please excuse this phrase, that's the lazy man's way out. Right? To accept someone else's opinion of you as the truth of you is a laziness. It's saying, in this moment, I don't want to find out the truth of myself, so I'm just going to hang it on everything you've ever told me about myself. That is giving away your power. And that is that is an understanding that comes with time and self-study, but that it really is the reality. When you go to the store, do you want to pick out your own clothes? Of course. You go to the restaurant, do you want to pick out your own food? You're at home on the radio. You're at home turning on the radio. No one else is there but you. Do you want to select your own radio station, or do you want your neighbor to run in through your door and put on what they want you to listen to? Which one do you prefer? So why would you allow your definition of yourself to be anything different? If you want to be the one that selects the things in your life that you follow and that you pursue, then your own definition of yourself should be the very same way. You be the one to define you. Don't give that power to other people. Someone tells you, well, you're always wrong. You always do this. Remind yourself immediately, there is no such thing as always and never. There is no such thing. Someone else tells you, well, you're just not worth it. There's no such thing as not worth it. And that is something that is coming from a person who is in a deep state of suffering, who has nothing else to say other than something that is violent and harmful. Why are you taking that into yourself? Remember, food is not the only nourishment we receive, and food is not the only container for poison. Words are also either nourishment or poison. What we see, nourishment or poison. What we hear, nourishment or poison. What we feel, tactile, nourishment or poison. And what we accept determines if we're going to be nourished or poisoned. So cultivate within ourselves. And if we don't know how to do that, then ask. Begin some process to learn how to become you, absent those other opinions. We're never going to be completely free of those opinions because we're human beings and, it's part of being human, but we can be free enough from them that we understand the BS that they represent and then put them in their place more often than not. Instead of carrying them around on our shoulders like they're a weight that we're meant to carry, they're not. They're not. Every time someone says something mean to you, you can say the following to yourself. This individual is suffering and they're trying to give me the gift of their suffering. I'm not going to accept that gift in this moment. I'm going to let them carry their own suffering because they're the only ones who can. And I will carry my own because I am the only one who can. Does that make sense? Yeah? Yes.
I really appreciated how you explained when someone says, I just want you to be happy, that's really them for their own sake. Like, I need you to be happy so that I can be okay. And I've been on both sides of that. I've certainly wanted other people to be okay so that I can be okay. And I've also felt that knowing, like, they're just very uncomfortable because I'm not okay right now. But, so it helps me to just give myself permission that, like, it really doesn't matter where they are, what they want, or them, thinking that they're, like, wishing me well and wanting me, it doesn't change where I am. And then you were talking about, boundaries and skills needed, and spending time with myself to know who I am and understand myself. And that's a struggle for me with society, with outside expectations of, my role as a mom and wife. And so how, like even taking, years ago, taking some steps to, like, do things for me and, like, going away. And, like, I've grown since then, but I still feel like, how do I know when, like, not that it's okay, but how do I know when I truly need something versus I'm just wanting that because that's easier or better or whatever.
Yeah. So, and again, most things are very simple. When we kind of put the emotional reaction away a little bit, acknowledge it's there, and then say, okay, without the emotional reaction, what's the reality here? And the reality is that we're indoctrinated to believe that we should come last. And again, it's, and I think that things in the world are kind of evening out in the way that harm is inflicted on people. I'm so sorry to say that, but women particularly have been kind of the target of this, where women take the burnt toast, right? That's an old saying. It's like the woman takes the burnt toast. But I think now we're seeing that that's even going over toward men too, and there's a lot more of this. Now the men are feeling compelled, obligated to take the burnt toast, and it's like, somebody take the burnt toast and throw it away, please. And just give everybody golden toast. But somebody, we typically have this feeling that we have obligations all the time to make other people happy. And that's mistaken. Our obligation under Dharma is not to make other people happy, it's to not harm them. Not harming them doesn't mean making choices for yourself that they're not going to like. That's not harm. If you make a choice for yourself and you throw it in someone else's face and you say, I'm doing this because you stink, that's harm, right? That's blame. But if you're making healthy choices in your own life for the rediscovery of your own self and purpose, then that's not harming people. You can't control the way other people receive things. So, let me go back for a second. There are so many things that I wanted to say in response to that. So, we have this tendency to think that we have to put ourselves last. But here's kind of a good way of looking at it. Everything is fine. The kids are doing well in school, just like as a mom, right? When my kids were young. Kids are doing good in school. My husband was there. I wanted to go away for a weekend by myself to go on a yoga retreat. There was a point in my life where I would have never, ever, ever done that because I would have felt too darn guilty. But the reality is, it's okay to go. It's okay to go because there's nothing that needs my immediate attention here right now. And I know I'm a phone call away, a couple hours away, get in the car, come back, But there's nothing I'm running away from. Right? So maybe this is a good question. There's nothing I'm running away from. I simply would like to go and take the weekend to do meditation and practice some yoga and maybe learn a little bit. Versus, there's a storm coming in. And my family is here, or the people that I have a responsibility to are here, and the lights go out, and the heat is off, and I run away, and I say, well, I'm going to go to get away from this and to avoid my responsibility of taking care of these people. Right? So when we're running away from something, then maybe we need to reassess ourselves. Because running away from something is not self-care. Right? It's not self-care. But if we're going and we're not running away, then what's the matter with that? There's nothing the matter with that. Please don't misread my words. By running away, I'm talking about avoidance. Right? Avoidance. I'm not talking about right-sizing relationships. I'm not talking about that. That's not running away. Do you all know what I mean by that? Like sometimes people will say, well, I feel like if I'm leaving this relationship, or I feel like if I leave this job, or I feel like if I don't become invested in my son's baseball, whatever game, I feel like I'm running away. No. Right-sizing your relationships is not running away. Running away is when you are avoiding because you don't want confrontation. Yeah. Angelique?
I am so lost in all of that. And I feel like I would really like to understand that because I'm not sure. God bless you.
Bless you.
I'm just not sure
Which part of it?
if it's avoidance, if it's, would you say right sizing?
Mm-hmm.
Right sizing, I'm not sure where the line is. And I also, I don't know how to say it, so I'm just gonna get the thought out there, but the person that it's not, you said earlier about I'm saying about myself, I'm because you said I was stupid or whatever your thing was, that now I'm saying, oh yeah, don't ask me, I'm stupid, blah, blah, blah. And then taking on that characteristic that somebody else assigned to me, and the lazy man's out. But what if that's not your ish? It's
Somebody else's?
somebody else's. And so, from there, you're listen,
You can't fix
your
them.
stuff isn't my stuff.
You can't
But
fix
the
them.
avoidance and the right sizing and caring for that person, and you know what I mean? I understand how it all goes like this, the right way.
So let's see if I can clear it up a little bit. In the Bhagavad Gita, we have Arjuna. And Arjuna is a warrior. And he's a great warrior. And he's never had a problem standing up for what is right. He's never had a problem standing up for what is good. He's never had a problem doing what needed to be done to take right action. But he finds himself in a dilemma, right there on page 1, Bhagavad Gita. He finds himself in a dilemma because the battle that he has to enter into now involves people that he knows and people he grew up with and people who he has attachments to. And granted, these are people who also tried to kill him, and these are people who have done him and his family wrong, and who are exploiting society in other ways and who are corrupt. But he's saying to himself, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do my duty because they're my family. That's avoidance. I don't want to go on this battlefield. I don't want to face the fact that these people, that they have done these horrible things. It's better that they kill me than I correct the situation. That's avoidance. Yeah.
As soon as you started with that, I already knew what the answer was.
I knew you would. I knew you would. I knew it.
Okay, guys.
All right, so just
Allison.
a follow-up.
Stephanie.
So you were saying, I don't know if it was tying into how you were trying to explain spirituality in terms of like courage and bravery and facing fear. And you talked about honesty in our heart versus grasping in our mind.
Mm-hmm.
So that made me think of like, in any situation, being able to know in my heart, like the truth, and face it, even when it's someone I love,
Even when it's uncomfortable.
I feel like I shouldn't, or it's not nice. It's like,
Or you're afraid of the unknown.
yeah.
Yeah. When we look at avoidance, too, we can also say, a person comes to me and tells me, or maybe a whole slew of people, you're this, you're that, you're wrong, you have no value. And eventually, psychologically, it's psychologically, it's a very complicated matter, and some of those injuries are very difficult to undo. But once I know, right? Once I have an inkling that what I have been told is incorrect about myself, that's kind of a difficult knowing to put down. Then the acknowledgement that these people have some validity to what they're saying is habit. It's not because I actually believe it, it's because it's become a habit to believe it. My reaction has become habituated. And if I don't break that habit, the only thing I'm avoiding is my true self. The only thing I'm avoiding is knowing myself, to be strong, to be brave, to be courageous, to be compassionate, to be loving, to be whole, to be of value. That's what I'm avoiding. When I give my power away to other people, I'm avoiding my own power. Does that make some sense? No? Carissa?
Just to comment to what Stephanie said, I think it's safe to say, based off what you said, on the day of graduation, we have fully understood Arjuna's dilemma.
Any other questions or comments right now? No? It's a simple matter, but it's a very complicated matter, and that's why we talk about it often. Because on different days, we'll take it in differently. We'll hear different words and different parts of it. It'll be relevant for different reasons. And so we come back to this quite often. This idea of what exactly is like this authentic self? What exactly is it to have awareness? What is it to be the gardener who tends and nourishes the garden versus the gardener who picks flowers only? What is it? And how do we embody that in our own life? And so maybe for the next few days or next week or maybe beyond, if it's purposeful for you, whenever someone looks at you and associates a certain value with you, don't accept it right away. Good or bad, because people do give you, false compliments too. Oh, you're the greatest thing since PB&J. And it's like, okay. Right? Totally. So you got to get that realistic kind of, step back from whatever it was that was said and ask yourself, am I going to invest in this? Is this worth investing in? And I pretty much guarantee, although I don't guarantee anything, but I can pretty much guarantee, for most things you'll say, it's not worth the investment. Because what does an investment do but pays you more? So if you invest in someone else's negative words about you, you're only going to breed more negativity. So don't invest in that. And if you invest in someone else's false, acclamations of your greatness, you're only going to be investing in more ego. So come to the middle road of humility. Be aware of what people are saying to you, of what you're reading on the billboard, of what you're listening to in the music that you listen to. What's the message you're receiving? Be aware of that and ask yourself, is it really a great idea for me to invest in this? Knowing that investments pay us back. Multiple. Yeah. Let's sit tall, close the eyes. Take a breath in and a breath out. Draw the hands together in front of the heart. And we'll lift our voices in one Om. Breathing in. Om. Bowing the head to the heart, acknowledging all that is, all that isn't. Drawing the face to center, releasing the hands. Thank you all so much for being here today to have this conversation. And be well, walk well. Smile on the inside. Don't smile for other people to appease their stubbornness, but smile on the inside of yourself, knowing that this journey that you're on, whether you know you're on it or not, it's going to lead you in many different directions, but ultimately one destination, and that is to knowing yourself, eventually. Knowing yourself. Very good. So they're serving brunch. If you haven't eaten already, please do. And otherwise, I'll see you all next week or sooner. Thank you. Good. YTTs, you can take your lunch now, and then we'll come back together. It is 11:30. Let's come back together at 1 o'clock, and we'll meet in the auditorium at that point. Okay?